On the Keto Bipolar podcast, Matthew Baszucki and Dr. Iain Campbell explore the frontiers of the emerging field of metabolic psychiatry. In episode 29, we welcome David Baszucki, founder and CEO of Roblox. David and his wife, Jan Ellison Baszucki, a previous guest of the podcast, are co-founders of Baszucki Group, a social change venture driving new research in metabolic psychiatry. It's time to start a new conversation about bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is more than just a chemical imbalance in the brain. Let's talk about energy. The brain is one of the most energy-hungry organs in the human body. Bipolar brains have impaired glucose metabolism, and this can cause destabilization of brain energy. People with bipolar disorder are at 2 to 3 times the risk of type 2 diabetes. Yet few treatments address these metabolic underpinnings of the condition. Enter ketones, an alternative fuel source for the brain.
Thank you very much, David, for making time to speak to us today.
It's really a pleasure to be on the program, and thank you both for creating and hosting the program. It's a real honor.
Of course, Dad, I can't believe you're on. We have never been on a podcast together, and we got some interesting stuff to talk about. You know, we could talk about Roblox if we get there, but this is about keto and bipolar. And I guess 2 things that would be really fun for us to get into is, number one, what it was like for you to see me go through all of this and come and rescue me on the streets of Los Angeles during my last Psychotic episode. This was in 2017. I was 21 years old. And then also, you know, if we get through that, maybe we could touch on your own metabolic health protocol. Because I know, having been your son for a few years now, you are a very metabolically healthy guy, the same way I am. So just diving into that first topic, you know, you saw me go through all of this as my father. The psych wards for years from 2016, 2017, in and out. What was the whole experience like from your end? And then coming to get me that last time, what was that like as well?
I think what's really interesting is mental health issues affect a lot of people in the country and at the same time, and the world. And at the same time, for those that have not had an immediate family member or relative or friend go through it, I can remember almost my time before this where we have a very naive view on mental health issues. It's not clear, I think, to most people whether this is a physical, biological issue versus just something that's therapy can help. We're not used to thinking of a mental health issue the same as a broken arm. It's almost like we think of it as something different based on popular culture and literature and all of that. So one of the biggest things in going through this is just learning that mental health issues for me are just as biological as a broken arm and just as biological as heart disease or cancer. They are a physical thing. So that's been a real eye opener. You know, along the way, when there were some early times when you had your first incidents and you came out of your first year at school, that there was a time of trying to figure out how to deal with this, literally how to find a doctor, how to go through this. And it was very surprising to me, literally how radical the experience can be for someone who doesn't know what to expect. It's hard to get the right medical help, to get a doctor that can coach you of what to do. So I have a lot of empathy for millions of families around the world who may go through an initial mental health episode and be completely, what do we do? I don't know if you remember one night when you were in one of your first manic episodes, my instinct was to track you. And so at about 2 a.m., you went on a walk, out into Ladera, out into, I think we went the Dish or Arastadero or somewhere around our neighborhood.
Yeah.
We just went on a 4-hour walk from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Wow.
And I didn't know, I wasn't familiar in what happens when someone goes manic. I had the instinct to kind of track you, and so there's a lot of that crazy learning. So prior to that, ultimately where we are today, which is our discovery of keto, there are many, many stories and many, many learnings, including arguably the scariest one, the LA incident,
Yes.
where, thank goodness we found you and we're able to kind of bring you in, and arguably that was one of the major starts, I think, to recovery.
This is so interesting to me because this family journey has started a whole field of science, and that is such a rare thing to happen, that a family experience would transfer into being an actual global field of science. Like just this week, we've had Nature Mental Health publishing papers on metabolic psychiatry, and all that's happening, all the trials all over the world, centers starting. This came from the story of you guys and your family. So I'm really excited to hear from start to finish, how did this come about? And I think people can get a sense for the spirit of metabolic psychiatry from this. Like, why did this begin? Where did this come from? And it really was the kind of care within a family that generated a lot of scientific exploration based on this. So if you don't mind, I'd love to hear from the beginning with you guys as a family. I've experienced this journey with my father as well. And one thing that helped me was to know that times could be normal when I was, when we're kind of younger, there was times of wellness where I knew what it felt like to be normal. Can you guys remember those times and what it felt like when times were good and you felt healthy before experiencing bipolar? What was that like?
Well, yeah, things were great. I mean, we had an amazing relationship all through middle school and high school, and dad would drive me, come to Little League and drive me to all these Little League games and come to water polo, and was participating in all of the school events at my middle school and high school. And so we had this wonderful relationship and healthy, precocious children going through high school. And then really, Ian, the whole wrench. I mean, Dad, what was it like for you when that March in 2016, we had this whole wrench basically thrown into our family's life?
Yeah, we had arguably had in your junior year a little blip,
Mhm.
um, which we're not sure could have been a very early mini hypomanic episode. Not knowing anything about bipolar or mania at the time, it self-resolved, I believe, through time and what we thought was therapy, when we didn't really know it was possibly a hypomanic blip. But then, yeah, in March of 2016, freshman year, um, arguably going through a lot of stressors that could contribute. In retrospect, I guess, Matt, March 20th, that solstice is also peak time for bipolar mania to
Yes,
kick
the
in.
equinox. Yes, yes, yes.
That equinox, we've learned, is really a big time and actually has some evolutionary and biological connection to spring and coming out of hibernation and all of that. So no, that was once again probably a few weeks before that journey we made that one night, where you were starting to text in an irregular way. Some of your friends at school said Matt is acting, in a kind of a strange way. We came and brought you home, and that's what kind of kicked off that journey over several years. Incredible work by your mom, Jan, to really just try everything. Um, Many in and outs of the hospital system, learning what a 5150 is, getting familiar with all of the different crazy medications, probably 20 plus types of medications. Having some doctors share just, hey, this is the way it is. Matt will be on 4 to 5 medications for the rest of his life. That's just the way it rolls. That's what you have to expect. And then I would say, after all of that, and there's once again lots of anecdotes we can go through. The way I would characterize it is a traditional stable period on a certain cocktail of meds where you were functional, definitely not yourself, could kind of plod through life in a way. And then that key moment where your mom and I were just constantly searching, there's got to be something else out there in addition to all of the things we tried. And the light bulb went on. Your mom swarmed on it, found resources, both doctor, found resources, dietitian. At that point, you had enough insight to say, let's give it a try. And that insight is critical because I think at certain other points where you did not have insight, no way, like I'll eat whatever I want, right? So you had enough insight to be willing, even though I felt you were not yourself and you were on this medication cocktail, to say, let's give it a try. And that was the big breakthrough. And think of it, all the doctors we saw, all of the medical establishment, not one of them mentioned, hey, try a keto diet.
Yeah, it's
So
crazy. I remember just being, I couldn't even I was functional, but I was sedated by a cocktail of 5 heavy duty medications: mood stabilizer, benzodiazepine, anticonvulsant medications. And I was functional, but the momentum of my illness just wanted to take me manic. And all of these medications weren't treating the root cause, which was the metabolic dysfunction. And so I was somewhat functional, but like you said, Dad, I was not myself. And if we had not found this therapy, I would have had a very difficult life on 5 heavy duty, soul sucking psychiatric medications, just trying to find my way around. And, things would have been very, very challenging. And so the fact that we found this is a miracle, but the fact that none of the doctors even told us about it and it essentially cured me is also, it's tragic, but it's also remarkable that we were just able to find it.
I'd love to hear the story from both your sides because you've both individually shared this story, what happened at UC Berkeley and after that in San Diego and LA. But I'd love to hear it from both your sides. So you're saying, David, about insight. Matt, when you were texting David, so did you feel like there was something wrong, or did it feel like things were okay and this all made sense to you? You were saying it can be hard to have insight when you experience
Mm,
symptoms. What did it feel like to you from your perspective when you were sending those texts?
mm. Well, I thought I was having a spiritual awakening. And I don't believe spiritual awakening and manic episode are completely mutually exclusive. I think there were elements of truth in that, but it was out of control. And I thought so for 2 years. I didn't develop real insight until 2018, 2 years after the initial episode, when I was at a treatment center in Los Angeles. I remember I called my mom and I said, "Something's wrong. I'm very sick. I need to get well." Um, and then, of course, that was after the whole Los Angeles fiasco where I had ran away from home. I was running around on the streets of Los Angeles. I slept in a lifeguard tower. I was in South Central, taking drugs and doing all this stuff. And fortunately, Dad, you came down to LA and found me in a Starbucks, and I was a homeless person, and you managed to get me into a psych ward that last time.
What
yeah,
was
in retrospect, that was the scariest of the many episodes. So this was probably your third or fourth manic episode at that point in time. On this one, you had I think you'd been staying with relatives in Carmel. You got on a bus. It was really scary because you were streaming on social media for a while. Um, and so then you got down, and then you got down to a town south by San Diego where there were some relatives present. So for a while, it was also okay, let's observe. Um, I went down one time with your mom, and we had a coordinated tried to get the police to 5150 you into a psych ward, but the law, you were so on it at that point, you convinced the cops you were totally okay.
Wow.
So we had this big setup. the cops, me, you all converge. They say, yeah, let's talk. Say, hey, I'm fine. This is great. I don't need to go anywhere. And so we kind of lost our chance. And then I think then you started having a rougher time. You went and visited a friend in LA, and then things got kind of scary because deep in your manic episode, you went on a multi-day hike. I don't know how you made it from, northern LA down through who knows what route you took. And by the end of this hike, I think you'd lost a lot of your stuff and you were down to a laptop and a phone and sleeping in Starbucks and stuff like this. And thank goodness, it's a little scary to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, thank goodness your mom and you were able to have that email convo. And I don't know how you and your mom had this convo, but she just said, hey, can you just stay in that Starbucks for a few hours? And you said, sure, I'll stay in the Starbucks for a few hours. And behind the scenes, like, we launched this super Navy SEAL mission. Like, it was literally, I'm texting your mom, we got a flight in 7 minutes. I'm on the next LA flight, plop down on the ground, prearranged rental car, just run to the rental car, drive over to this Starbucks, probably got there literally in about 98 minutes from the phone call.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. You were there. And this was peak mania. All of your backpack and all was gone. You just had like a Safeway bag with your laptop in it. Everything else you had given away to people because you were in a manic episode. You were giving stuff away. And so then the tricky thing was we had memory of the prior attempt at a 5150, and I had the concern in real time that if the cop showed up and we tried a 5150 again, you'd go running. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, if Matt goes running, this is going to get really bad really quickly. So we started working together. I said, hey man, we should go buy some cigarettes. What do you think? And you thought that was a cool idea. So we went and bought some menthol cigarettes and
Nice.
we're smoking. And then I'm like, while we're smoking the cigarettes, I'm texting your mom and everything, like, what should we do? What should we do? And we're like, hey, let's see if we can go to Uncle Richard's in San Diego area. So, cause then we're going to have a safe place to land. So then I'm texting everyone and we're smoking, like, hey, what do you think about we go see Uncle Richard in San Diego? And you're just like, that'd be great, Dad. Let's go do that.
Yeah.
So then we get in the car. Then I couldn't believe it. You got in the car with me. And so we got the windows down. We're driving south on 5 or whatever. You're smoking. The car's full of smoke. I'm texting your mom and Uncle Richard and like saying, okay, I'm coming in hot. It's a miracle. Like, we're coming in hot. We got Matt. We can't believe it. Uncle Richard's, we're ready. Like, I'm getting everything set up. There's no one in the house. We're going to have like this little welcome. So we roll in to Uncle Richard's, and then he's totally chill. Hey, Matt, heard you been on the streets. Like, what's up?
Yeah.
So now we're thinking, okay, you could run at any time. Is there a way we could work with you to get you voluntarily into a psych ward? And so Uncle Richard, while you'd been on the streets, I think you'd been punching a wall with your hands or something,
I had bruises all over my wrists. I remember they were all bruised.
As part of your manic episode somewhere on the streets. So, Richard was pretty smart, and he says, hey, Matt, man, your hands, they look pretty beat up. You're saying like, yeah. And so we developed this plan, like, hey, we should go get a big steak at this big restaurant. And you said, yeah, I'd love a steak. So we kind of got you buy in. And once again, we were trying to be very respectful that you're deep in a manic episode. So we're trying to like work with you. But you went for the steak. And then Richard said, hey, Matt, on the way to that steak, maybe you should just get your hands checked out. You look pretty beat up. Like, what do you think? And you said yes. And we couldn't believe it. So we're like, so then I'm texting your mom, we're finding a hospital, all of that stuff. So now we agree to go get the steak. We hop in the car. You're kind of rolling with it. And so behind the scenes, your mom and everyone lined up. This is the hospital. Go to this emergency room. You're ready to go. So we say, oh, yeah, let's just pull into this emergency room, check out your hands. And so then we come in. And sure enough, they've got a really good psych doctor on call. They're like rushing in. They're going to be like 15 minutes. And so then Richard and I were like, okay, we got 15 minutes. We got to keep it chill in this emergency room. Because if Matt runs, like we just blown our chance.
Yeah.
So we're like, yeah, hey, let's go outside, have another smoke. Cool. It's a pretty fun place. Let's go back in. So then this super savvy psych doctor says, okay, let's take a look at your hands, Matt. And they were in on the gig a bit. And she said, look, yeah, your hands are pretty beat up. But then in a way, she knew how to talk to you. And she said, Matt, it seems like you've been having just a rough time on the streets, man. Like what do you think about just having a day or two, chill out with us, voluntarily admit? And you said yes.
It's a crazy story.
It was a miracle.
Yeah.
So, and that was kind of like, in a way, linked to possibly you getting that first insight.
I had my first moment of insight 2 months after that.
That must have been such a scary experience, having a son who's well and is doing all these things, going to Berkeley and doing computer science and is so engaged with life, to suddenly have this completely unfamiliar situation. How did you make sense of it? Was it immediately clear to you this was a mental health thing, or how did you make sense of it at the time when you first realized something was wrong and you went out to find him?
Yeah, I mean, that very first thing, within a week or two, we did get a doctor who was a psychiatrist who diagnosed Matt as bipolar going through mania. So we knew pretty quickly. I think the learning about what is bipolar, what is mania, how does it work, continued over many, many years and continues to this day even.
And we tried everything. I mean, I remember you and mom were at every alternative treatment, alternative medicine, doctors, and we tried TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, where I had these electrode things hooked up to my brain. We tried all these alternative treatments. I went to a treatment center in the Southwest where they had this sauna protocol where we went in saunas for 90 minutes a day, and they fed us this concoction of electrolytes and supplements that was supposedly going to heal me. And we tried all of this and therapy and the best psychiatrists and the best doctors and all the medications, and none of it worked. And when we found, I think, Dad, when we found keto, so you all found keto in 2020, Mom came to me and said, Matt, there's this doctor in Massachusetts who is treating people with depression and schizophrenia, bipolar disorder with a ketogenic diet, metabolic intervention. I think when I started it, and maybe this is a good segue, Iain, but when I started it, I knew because I had been grappling with these manic episodes and taking heavy doses of antipsychotic. When my sleep normalized and we went through that March, because I started in January and we went through the manic season in March, and I didn't have to take extra medication. I think we knew within 10 or 12 weeks after I started and did keto that something miraculous was happening to my brain.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about trying the keto is it can work side by side with the existing meds. It's not like you had to turn off your existing meds. I could see the benefits on top of your existing meds. because even with your existing meds, you were compromised to some extent, and I could see that changing.
In a few short years, you got to see a lot of the mental health care system. You went through so many different treatments, like over 20 different things, trying everything possible. And you had a lot of capacity to be able to try lots of different things and see across the gamut, nothing was really giving the relief to Matt that he needed. And what was that feeling like? Because you must be used to working with really competent people and systems who can do things effectively. And obviously there are wonderful psychiatrists but there are some limitations of the tools. What was that like to experience not being able to find a solution within the existing healthcare system?
The metaphor to me would be being in the 1950s black and white TV cigarette ads, and the doctor smoking a cigarette and saying this is the healthiest cigarette. And so the reason I feel that as a metaphor is that's a metaphor where there's a huge system of existing knowledge. Within that, system, there's some very early knowledge that maybe cigarettes aren't that good for you, the early cancer research, but the system itself, which makes money on recurring revenue or makes money on meds or makes money, there's no financial incentive basically to move to purely what you eat. I believe there's an optimistic future financial incentive where managing diet and helping people and companies actually is an interesting business. But relative to the pharmaceutical industry, there's no big recurring revenue business with adjusting how you eat. And so I think my experience was somewhat, like I said, surprising that with all of the doctors we talked to, we were still early in that curve. It was like the 1955 with a bunch of doctors saying that's going to cause cancer. They weren't saying that. The optimistic hope is that even without a major competing product, like you're either smoking and spending money or you're not smoking and no one's making money off of it. But even without a competing product, my hope is organically, as more podcasts like yours, more people learn about this, keto will be to mental health a little like not smoking is to cancer. It'll become a publicly knowledged, accepted, well-known practice. And that will be an amazing opportunity and a time. And I think what you're all doing is part of that.
I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on what needs to change in the mental health care system. And I just want to come back quickly to Matt, your experience with trying keto. What was that like for you to find something after trying so many different treatments? It must have been incredibly frustrating to not be able to get the help you needed. And what was it like to find something that finally worked? Was there a time that stood out to you as like, oh, this is now really helping me?
It was a miracle because the pattern had been my last psychiatric ward was late 2017. From 2018 through 2020, for those 3 years, I actually managed to stay out of the psych ward. I had insight, and I had a meticulous tracking sheet where I would track my mood elevation in the morning and the evening, as well as my sleep. I had a Oura ring. I was tracking my sleep and watching my sleep every day. And the pattern was the same. I would try to lower antipsychotic dose of olanzapine medication. I would begin to wake up earlier and earlier, wake up at 6 a.m., then 5 a.m., then 4:30 a.m. I could feel the hypomania coming on, the racing thoughts, the grandiosity, this classic plethora of hypomanic symptoms. And I became intimately familiar with what that felt like through my daily tracking because I had taken an internal register of where my mood was at on a daily basis. I knew what that feeling felt like. Then after 3 years, we got the team together, a dietitian. Went on keto. I was tracking ketones. My sleep normalized, and that was the first thing I noticed, Ian, that I would wake up at 7 a.m. every day, and I had already had a lot of good health protocols in place. I had quit nicotine and drugs and alcohol the previous year. So overall, my body had fewer of these nefarious invasive substances. And so I went on it, and 2 months, 3 months in, and then we got to March. And March, of course, is the time during the equinox when the days are getting longer the most rapidly. and I had always gone hypomanic in March, had an episode every single March, in late March, and I went through on 5 milligrams of olanzapine, and I was looking at my tracking log because just recently going through it, I saw that in previous years I would have to take 20, sometimes 25 milligrams of olanzapine medication in March just to stop these manic episodes from happening and stabilize my mood. And then I went through that March on 5 milligrams every day, and things fell into place. I was able to work. I was able to function. My executive function came back. My brain felt like it could work again. And then we gradually began the process of tapering medications, and I never had a hospitalization again. And now I haven't had any bipolar disorder symptoms in a long time. It feels like I don't have the illness anymore, but I'm very strict about keto, exercise, all these, no drugs and alcohol, all these metabolic therapies.
The time I knew if this wasn't a fluke was sometime after you'd gotten on the keto diet. Going on a trip, a family trip, was always a little dicey when you were on your bipolar meds because there would be time change, travel, whatever, new environment, and so it's never quite predictable. And on this one trip, I remember it was early in keto diet. We had still been using a chef. We got to a resort, and I think what we were picking to eat was a good attempt at keto. But I think there's something about it, like we're eating a lot of avocados or something, and they actually had more carbs than we thought. And so 2 or 3 days into that trip, you started getting a little hypomanic and a little sleep was getting less regular. You could see some of those patterns. You still had insight. And then you made an emergency U-turn and you said, okay, hardcore keto. And I think you started every meal in this resort basically saying a little fillet of fish and like 2 things of melted butter. And you did this for 1 or 2 days and all of the chefs loved it. You just said, yeah, this is a medical diet. I need a fillet of fish and a lot of melted butter. And then 2 days later, just U-turn back, like just boom, back,
Wow.
back to stability. That for me is when I just knew this was not a fluke. This is like hardcore medicine, more powerful than most of the other medicine you were on.
And that's from the perspective of trying so many different treatments, right? They help more than most people would ever experience. So to look at all of that and to say that this was effective is particularly interesting. Did you, when you were going on a ketogenic diet, or when you first heard about the ketogenic diet, David, were you kind of quite skeptical of this? Because obviously it's completely outside the paradigm of how we think about treatment.
Actually, I was really excited from a systems theory point of view because I never could quite get my head around all of the supposed cures for bipolar. These are like blocking receptors and it's genetic and like I could never get my head around the notion that this high a percent of the population would be genetically not screwed up or would it really need, like, it just didn't make sense to me. What I did know at the time was like this March kind of mania and fall, September depression had a little alignment with like weird behavior patterns in humans and animals. Like everyone kind of slows down in the fall, bears hibernate. There's actually some notion that some low grade bipolar is a survival instinct. Way up north, you stop talking and crumple in a ball all winter and don't eat much. And then in March, the sun is out and you gotta like go eat and mate and find stuff and go crazy. So there's like a biological foundation there. The thing about the keto diet that got me excited is the notion that arguably up till about 10,000 years ago, a lot of humans evolved heavily not necessarily omnivore, almost slightly more carnivore. I would say closer to cats than to pigs. Pigs are omnivores, cats are carnivores. You can measure proportional length of the intestine to the body. You can look at the teeth, and you can kind of try to figure out. Humans definitely, based on intestinal length and other things, are closer to carnivore than omnivore. And so that's a pretty big genetic adaptation to make 10,000 years ago, when over the course of the last 10,000 years, we figure out this amazing technology to scale the size of our culture. Like, we figure out agriculture, we can generate more carbs, we can have bigger civilizations, what an amazing achievement. But humans are not I like the notion that we're just not fully adapted to that. And we're still trying to adapt. And then on top of it, arguably in the last 100 years, even more, the sugar, corn syrup, carb ratio has gone up. And I could really get my head around the notion that, for some people with a bipolar tendency, they need that constant energy of a higher fat-based keto source. That to me seemed like it really made sense. So all of a sudden, to me, it felt like we were trying something that could actually have a systemic scientific foundation. And so it felt like a giant, exciting relief to try it.
This is so cool to hear, because you worked in like refining mechanical physics of computer systems and making things work on the right principles, and then you get these amazing emergent outcomes from those things. And so what was it that you saw in Matt going into ketosis and the evolutionary piece, the things you mentioned? What did it reveal to you about how the assumptions or the kind of working principles of psychiatry might be kind of misaligned? You've refined many kind of complex systems to work within the right frameworks. What was it you saw would be fundamentally perhaps flawed about the way psychiatry was being approached from this experience of ketosis and evolutionary thinking?
Well, I'm not an expert in psychiatry, so I had more of a naive, outside-in looking view. I do know that generally in the human population, like, whatever the percentages are, 5, 10, 20% of us aren't walking around unable to walk. Unfortunately, some of us can't walk, but it's not at a 5 or 10%. Like, that doesn't make evolutionary sense that 5 or 10% of us wouldn't be able to walk. And so the percentages of people undergoing, unfortunately, mental health things seems higher than would naturally occur in nature, if these are also physically based. So I love the notion environmental sources, what we eat, amount of sunlight, how we sleep, has more power than we might expect. And it's a much more of a systems thing to think environmental to me, rather than that high of percent are genetically impinged, or also that high a percent actually, well, we actually discovered 14% of all people in the world need this drug to survive. Like, that didn't make sense. So going to environmental, diet, light, social, exercise, sleep, just felt fundamentally like it made sense to me.
Yeah, and this expands not only to the mental health, but all of the chronic disease, all of the Alzheimer's, the type 2 diabetes, all of these diseases that we know, the cancer that we know, have a large metabolic component for each of these. And just going back to the genetic thing, I'll mention one anecdote I heard, or one scientific thing I heard the other day, which is that the Safety lab on the East Coast here in the United States did this experiment where the theory has always been that cancer was a genetic problem, and that the problem was housed in the nucleus of the cell. What they actually did is they put healthy nuclei with damaged cancerous mitochondria in the same cell, and they did the reverse. They put damaged mitochondria with healthy nuclei. And what they found is that it's the mitochondria, the sickness in the mitochondria, that actually determines whether the cell is going to become cancerous. So this is all about, and mitochondria is all about energy metabolism. This is all about ketosis. But I think what we're going to find as we get deeper into the research here is that all of these illnesses, Alzheimer's, bipolar, schizophrenia, type 2 diabetes. I mean, the obesity crisis we have, there's no world in which this would have happened to a hunter-gatherer tribe where everyone goes obese. And there's a reason that it happened in the last 60 years, the last 40 years. It's because not only the carbs, Dad, you mentioned the carbs, which are a significant problem, just moving over from a moderate protein, high-fat diet, animal-based diet to high carbohydrates. But now, the last 40 years, we have refined carbohydrates that metabolize more quickly into glucose and cause a more significant insulin response that is driving the insulin resistance. So it's like a double whammy. We had the carbs, but then we switched to all these processed foods, and then now it's just a metabolic catastrophe.
So I imagine when you were diagnosed, you were explained that this is a kind of chemical imbalance or a neurotransmitter imbalance. How did this experience, Matt, change your view of what bipolar is fundamentally? How did you view this kind of neurotransmitter imbalance paradigm from this new perspective of ketosis?
Do we ever have any evidence for this chemical imbalance theory? I mean, were there ever, we've observed now, Iain, we've observed, the way the brain metabolizes glucose is different in populations with mental health versus healthy populations. We know that people with Alzheimer's, the pathways for glucose metabolism are damaged compared to general population of older people. I don't think we ever had any evidence for this neurotransmitter nonsense. And I suspect the reason is because a lot of the way the medical system is designed right now is to form a paradigm around illness that serves the function of selling a medication. So you look at statins, for example, statin medication. We have a medication called a statin that lowers LDL levels. Therefore, LDL becomes the target biomarker that determines your future risk of atherosclerosis and heart attack. When that's not the case, there are much better markers, ApoB, fasting insulin, etc. So we had this paradigm. I wonder whether we came up with this chemical imbalance nonsense because we had these medications that had some effect on neurotransmitters, or at least that was the thinking, and then it became a mechanism to just sell people medication. I mean, and they don't treat the root cause. And not only that, the medications cause metabolic damage. People gain 30, 40, 80. I've seen girls gain 80 pounds on olanzapine when they go on these medications. So I really believe it's a spiritual crisis, and keto and metabolic therapies, they don't work for everyone, but for more people than you might expect, if you're not familiar with them, can put these illnesses into remission.
This reminds me of, David, something you mentioned in the Tim Ferriss interview. You were talking about Finite and Infinite Games, the James Carse book. And I love the idea in that book that there's this definition of like abstract, where you're kind of taking a part of the whole picture and trying to make it the whole picture. You're taking neurotransmitters and trying to make it the whole story of mental health, whereas actually there's something much bigger going on. And, he talks about Hegel trying to move from abstract to concrete concepts, and the concrete concepts being the interconnected, more complex, kind of wider reality of a condition. How do you feel about this neurotransmitter paradigm now, seeing a kind of wider picture of metabolism and the picture of mental health? Do you think this is a more concrete kind of grounding for psychiatry going forward?
I mean, for me, the more out of the box you get as far as taking a step back and understanding a whole system, there can be additional layers of understanding. And so what's interesting is if we climb the tree of detail, okay, there's bipolar mania. Then above that, there's general mental health issues, schizophrenia, bipolar, eating disorders, whatever. Above that layer, there's a whole collection of chronic issues, mental health issues, chronic disease, diabetes, whatever. What's interesting to think is if the solutions aren't down at the bipolar mania level, aren't even at the mental health level, but are above that. And I always I was always a little confused on how do you concisely define the difference between bipolar or depression or mania or schizophrenia. And I was always confused that these were taught as these separate illnesses. I think there were times, Matt, at peak mania where, for me, you might have been schizophrenic. Like
100%.
you were seeing a set of overlay visions on top of reality. It's like your 3D simulator was running wild. You were seeing shapes and talking to people. I just saw that as extreme mania, or deeply into it. So that is what I think when you talk about kind of infinite games, it would be quite interesting if we started to see multiple things all in a unifying way get solved by good metabolic health. And then it would really be lovely. I'm not saying this is the case. I'm not a doctor or researcher. If what we see in both bipolar, depression, or maybe schizophrenia or other things more are symptoms rather than diseases, and they are not separate diseases. They are just symptoms of brain energy issues, but they're all just various manifestations of that. And so that would be a lovely infinite game. An even bigger infinite game is we see, in addition to mental health, physical health things in common are results of poor metabolic health, issues with insulin sensitivity, that same kind of thing. And it'd be really cool if, for certain types of type 2 diabetes, for example, that are highly influenced by diet, those start getting clustered as side-by-side mental health. They are both the results of your metabolic health.
I'm I'm curious from like a first principles perspective that you're describing of how to kind of create this infinite game of psychiatry instead of the limited paradigms we're currently in. What are the kind of first principles questions you'd like to see answered through research about the metabolic nature of these conditions?
Well, you're doing it, right? People around the world are doing it. I would say we are in the golden age in the last 5 years and the next 5 years of clinically valid AB dietary experiments, bipolar depression, eating disorders, that early data. Like, we're in the middle of that data coming in real time right now. The hope would be, in addition to, what I see from afar going on is your podcast, Metabolic Mind, all the people working on that. We're a little bit in the middle of the groundswell, get the public to know about it phase. The more that AB hardcore research is funded and comes out, I'm assuming that will help all of the psychiatrists around the world feel more comfortable in recommending metabolic therapies side by side the other therapies.
From someone who's been through this care system, what would you like to see change, having been through so much experience of so many different treatments? What would you like to see in 5-10 years change in psychiatry? If you were going in for the first time to get help again, how would you like it to be different based on what you've learned?
Well, a good question. I think we need to overhaul the whole system. I think there's a model that could potentially work for the situation I was in, which was florid manic psychosis, which is a lockdown facility that serves only ketogenic food for 6 to 9 months. Just give the brain time to stabilize. And the vision I have for this, and maybe we'll build it someday. I mean, I've had thoughts of this myself. It's going to be outdoor. We're going to be in Montana. We're going to have a big lot where you can run around and go for runs. We're going to feed you only steak and broccoli for 6 to 9 months. Just give the brain a chance to exist in a ketogenic state for some extended period of time in a lockdown facility. That is the critical piece that we don't have at the moment. And the psych wards, Iain, you would not believe what they were feeding me in the psych wards. They were feeding me root beer and chocolate milk and just all of these carbohydrates. And like you said, Dad, the more studies we get out, and that's why I'm so excited about this randomized controlled trial coming out of Australia, because that's the gold standard of medicine, where you can isolate the effect of one variable on a single population. Thus far, we've only had we've had a lot of case reports, which are wonderful, and we've had small clinical trials, but without a control group that have, for depression, for bipolar and schizophrenia, that have showed tremendous outcomes. We need the RCTs to convince mainstream psychiatrists and mainstream medicine that this is a viable treatment. There are a lot of doctors who you can chuck them anecdotes, you can give them case reports, you can even potentially show them personal stories of people who've gone through this, but their brains are not wired to connect the dots between diet and mental health in this way, because that's not the way the paradigm exists. That's not what they've been taught in medical school. They're entrenched in this notion of chronic disease, permanent brain disorder, etc. So the more RCTs, the more research we get. And like you said, Dad, this is just accelerating right now. This is the infancy of this movement, but I can feel the momentum. I can feel people want to get well. And when you also have a demand that's so profound, when people are so profoundly sick, I think this is going to explode. I really think in the next 5 years, 10 years, this is going to absolutely explode.
One of the coolest things about hearing the story is, you're describing going from this like family experience and noticing this change in ketosis, and then looking at it through systems thinking to look at what could we change about the way psychiatry is working. And there was someone who did this called Henri Labouré in the 1960s. He was the inventor of the very first antipsychotic. It was the very first antipsychotic drug. And if you read his textbooks, they're all about regulation of metabolism, mitochondrial function, and the things that he was testing when he developed the very first antipsychotic, chlorpromazine, were things that people are looking at for metabolism now, like methylene blue. He developed 3-hydroxybutyrate, which is a 4-hydroxybutyrate, which is a very close analog of 3-hydroxybutyrate, which is the ketones we measure on our Keto Mojo devices. This was like the earliest pioneer of psychiatry in the 1960s, and the developer of the very first antipsychotic had this same perspective that you're describing from your journey. So I feel like we're returning to something really meaningful about psychiatry, but the problem is the research is not developing new treatments. And I'm really interested from your systems thinking perspective, what do we need to change about the way we're doing research to get these kind of more inevitable outcomes of good treatments for bipolar? It feels like the system needs to be fixed so that we can develop these. What limitations are you seeing, and how could we make this a really effective way of making new treatments?
I'm not deep into it, but just hanging out with you, and Matt, I am optimistic at some point we may see maybe one lockdown facility in one hospital somewhere in the US that says, okay, for 3 months, we're going to run an experiment and get some dietitians in here and just see what happens if we run a lockdown for 3 months with a more keto leaning diet relative to the results they've seen. It would be wonderful to get some hard data like that. And I think there's other areas. I would say what is happening out right now in industry, there are companies who work with the health programs of companies who are starting to explore literally the money saving of helping educate people about metabolic health relative to the overall health bill. So there is a little bit of a free market pressure to take a giant company, pick a big defense company, or, companies we think about with tens and hundreds of thousands of people. If they nudge their healthcare to include education about metabolic health, their overall health bills may go down. So I do think we're going to see natural forces coming to bear here as the research gets more proven.
Do you think we'll have companies start to understand, CEOs, executives understand that this is potentially a better brain fuel that could help employees optimize how they work, and then start to encourage this in a systems way somehow?
Well, I would say at Roblox, we balance freedom. We want our employees to have freedom of choice in what they eat, but we do have jokes because our snack rooms, every single snack is labeled where it sits on both a Whole Foods index and a good energy index, so employees get a fair amount of visibility. And there are certain foods at Roblox that are both Whole Foods and good energy, like organic boiled eggs. There are other foods at Roblox that are neither Whole Foods and neither good energy, like a Coca-Cola, basically. And so there is a little education that is happening by kind of the labeling of that at Roblox.
I'd love to hear about your personal kind of metabolic health strategies that you've come across, both of you. And David, you mentioned applying this in Roblox. How do you view kind of metabolic health yourself? What strategies are you using and finding useful at the moment?
And I've been in not as leading adopter of my family or Matt, but I mean I've worn CGMs quite a bit, worn CKMs quite a bit, was a continuous ketone monitor. I've figured out for me my diet that works for me. It's basically very low carb for me, um, mix of fat and protein. For me, it's allowed me to I feel I have a personal feeling where 95% of the days I do feel an optimism, a waking up, just okay, wanting to seize the day, wanting to go fix stuff and build stuff. And then 5%, I know what it feels like to not want to fix stuff, to maybe more go hibernate or not do anything. Everything's broken and it's impossible. So by being aware of those two types of feelings and trying to adjust diet to have that wanting to go out and build and fix and seize the day, I have found that a lower carb diet for me has helped me be in that mode.
That's interesting. And Matt, in terms of you've talked about using kind of CGMs and CKMs and optimizing metabolic health. What are the kind of big pillars for you now, having been in this for a couple of years of experimenting with different strategies?
Oh yeah, so I got my CKM in. So dad is running a smuggling ring to get us these CKMs because they're for some reason not available in the United States, which is so ridiculous. But for everyone at home, I had my recovery for years measuring ketones with a blood prick twice a day. Okay, so this is completely viable. Get an idea of where your ketone levels are at. So yeah, so Ian, I went carnivore, as you know, last year. So it's moderate amounts of cheese and dairy. I'm actually thinking about dropping the dairy completely now. But yeah, so it's just all meat. I eat 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day. I love OMAD on the days I don't lift weights because it limits insulin response. There is some insulin response from protein. There's none from fat. 1 meal a day is great. Go eat a bunch of steak at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. That is an incredibly powerful intervention. And it gets me a lot of the way. It for me, it even ranks above sleep and exercise, which are both critical. But if I let up on my diet, I would run into a lot of trouble. I think diet and abstinence from drugs and alcohol and nicotine and caffeine, those two together are a lethal in a good way, powerful combination. And then
Yeah,
my
it's
ketone
fun.
levels are a result are high. What's that?
No, it's fun, right? Because Matt, you and I are riffing on diet, sleep, exercise, sunlight, other things, and we're always trying to stack rank what is the foundational power that I used to think for me sleep was the foundational power. I've moved to diet is the foundational power. Where if diet is robust, I can handle a fair amount of sleep disruption. Whereas if my sleep is robust, but I have dietary disruption, I will go into la la land.
That's exactly right. And I had this protracted withdrawal injury the last 2 years, and I've kept it together because my diet is super strict, and I find I can function at work 3, 4 hours of sleep. It's not the end of the world. And Dad, how many nights have we had where we're out late or we're doing something and we just go to dinner and we both order a steak and we go out and we get 5 hours of sleep and it's a party and we're both functional. And it's because we don't have all of this inflammation and oxidative stress and insulin resistance. We're just running on pure ketones, high octane premium brain fuel, and we're just functional people. It's so powerful. Um, and when people do make that metabolic shift, I mean, people's levels of thinking, your ability to abstract, your level of complex processing in thought process, actually, it can be transformed. So I'm with you. Like exercise, sunlight, sleep, But again, without the diet piece, everything just falls apart.
I mean, this really fits with what you're saying about the kind of evolutionary paradigm of thinking about this diet, sleep, exercise, all these affect the metabolic systems. I wanted to ask, so you're running on ketones now for like some period of the day. How is this helping you with all the cool things you're doing in the world, building Roblox, building companies, doing advocacy for mental health? How does it feel to run on ketones versus on glucose? Do you feel like it gives you another gear to be able to do these things?
I feel now it really does help. I can really tell the difference between 2 days. I think in the past 20 or 30 years ago when I didn't know about keto, I was having that same variation in my mental attitude day by day. I just thought it was a natural thing, when in fact it was just a random side effect of what I was eating. So now that I'm more aware of it, definitely helps. And I do feel if I changed my diet, personally went high carb, ate a pile of sugar, did that for a few days, I do think I'd be in pretty rough shape. I think I would be having a hard time approaching the day or feeling optimistic about going and solving things. And I feel I would probably move to a more defensive kind of mode.
Dad, what has your life's health, I know you were low glycemic and you were experimenting with different things, you were mountain biking. What has that journey of your own personal health been over the last few decades?
Yeah, now it's interesting. Now I've gotten into, I would say 20 years ago, I thought I needed to mountain bike 2 hours hard. Um, and I think now where I'm at is I feel an hour a day of something is enough. I'm into doing things that are more fun and interesting to do while still being the hour. I shared with you how in my 3 day a week CrossFit, we got the karaoke going and the musical instruments and all of that. It kind of makes it fun. I've also moved from mountain biking to hiking with a weighted vest just because, it's I'm not going to crash. I don't have to think about not crashing. I can go hike around in the woods. So I feel I've got a really good routine where I like what I'm doing for each hour every day. How about for you,
I'm
Matt?
the same. I'm the same way. I mean, my protocol's pretty basic. It's lifting Monday, Wednesday, Friday, heavy, but not too much time in the gym, maybe an hour or so, and then I'll go for a walk after dinner those days, and then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, hard cardio, 40 minutes, just burn it down to the ground, high intensity. Nordic training with 4 minutes all out elliptical stairmaster and then 2 or 3 minutes rest. I love stairmaster with the weight vest. That's my new thing. I'll do that 4 minutes or 7 minutes hard, get the heart rate up in the 160s, low 170s, and then do a rest period. Great for metabolic health. But I'm the same as you, Dad. I love to hike with my own weighted vest, the one you gave me actually, which I love. But I'm the same as you. I don't need hours and hours in the gym. I just want to get in there for an hour, hit it super hard, and then get out. And the combination of an hour workout, middle of the day, 10, 11 a.m., one massive meal at 2 p.m., a bunch of steak, and then the rest of the day frees up and there's so much time to work on projects and see friends. And another thing, Dad and Ian, of my traveling, because I did this big road trip this year of going through Los Angeles and up through Vegas and Utah. And Dad, we saw the fight, we did so much fun stuff, is learning that I don't need to eat all the time and doing my first 3-day fast and learning that if I go 24 hours with food, 36 hours with food, without food, it's not the end of the world. And I'm able to metabolize fat and I have all this fuel on me. I'm storing fuel everywhere. It's just life opens up because I'm not thinking about it constantly. And it's just one of the wonderful things of learning to think this way is that life becomes bigger. Food, in a sense, becomes more simplified, but then the rest of life opens up as well.
That's such a cool present to give to your son, a weighted vest. My son's 3, so it's not time for him yet. But one day, I'll aspire to that. That's
You
awesome.
could get him a little 2-ouncer, you know?
He's usually on my back being the weight himself. Like, I'll look forward to that.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
He's 20 kilograms, so it's no joke. You got.
That's a good weight.
It seems like a lot of the things you guys are doing are like, you're talking about having this insight of the spring and the kind of evolutionary piece of it. And it feels like a lot of the things you're doing are reconnecting to kind of evolutionary signals like sunlight, nutrition, fasting, ketosis, circadian rhythm. Like all these are kind of deep evolutionary mechanisms in the body. And it feels like from many different approaches, you're kind of maybe, am I right in saying you're trying to kind of optimize from those different perspectives towards a kind of more natural human environment?
Totally. I mean, I wear my Vibram. I wear the toe shoes now with zero support, and they're incredible. They've eliminated my ankle pain. The whole mission for me is to become closer to our ancestral environment, fewer toxins, more sunlight, more natural diet. I mean, Dad, I think it's the same for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I try to have lights out at 9, not 11. So that's one. Now, I don't know if this thing works, but I definitely am grounded wherever I go. And I mean, not mentally grounded, I mean physically grounded. So I've got all of my workspaces, I have a grounding pad, which means that when the heel of your hand is touching the grounding pad, it has a wire going all the way to the earth. And so you're not like floating relative to the earth. And so that one's a little early, but I do that as well. Definitely try to have complete darkness when I'm sleeping, 100% darkness, as well. Um, it just for me makes sense that evolution's done a pretty good job tuning these incredible systems we have, and we should first and foremost make sure we're kind of aligned with what evolution was working on and try to simulate some of that.
It's so interesting because the psychiatrist I mentioned on the library who developed the first antipsychotic, this is the same thing he thought. He thought that like we're in a mismatch from our evolutionary environment and it's creating states of hypermetabolism in the brain. And he saw the whole projects of psychiatry as trying to tune down these states of hypermetabolism. And in his textbooks, he has really detailed experiments showing how these antipsychotics he was trying to develop were basically turning down these hypermetabolic states. So when you were mentioning about the spring and Matt going into mania in the spring, or particularly at the equinox, that was something I found really fascinating because you can see there's variations in human gene expression that change with the seasons, and they particularly around these periods. There's birds migrating tens of thousands of kilometers across the ocean at the equinox in highly hypermetabolic states. So it really feels to me like the experiments you're doing feel very connected to the kind of the heart of what psychiatry was originally working on. In terms of ketosis, have you thought about how that might tie into this kind of evolutionary piece and what it could mean? You mentioned it makes you able to work more and have more energy. Do you think there could have been a purpose for ketosis that had that kind of evolutionary grounding that makes sense?
I would say exactly the opposite. The reason it's arguable based on the diet of humans between 10,000 years ago and maybe 500,000 to 1 million years ago, we were living in environments with a fair amount of fat, brain food, protein, and that sustained the giant brains we all have. It allowed us to evolve brains of the size we do. And it's interesting to imagine we actually evolved these oversized brains relative to our body size that use a lot of calories because we had enough of that type of food available. And as we've gone to more ag, we haven't fully adapted to different energy source. We've tried to adopt to a glucose energy source more than a fat energy source, but are not fully adapted.
Do you think, Matt, from like the experience of the spring and the kind of burst of energy, can you see a kind of, or maybe like a purpose to that at some point in evolutionary history that would have been useful in a kind of healthy version of it? Do you think that's the right way to think about this?
Maybe. I do believe I still have a slight healthy variation in energy where I get a boost. Right now, I'm coming out of getting a boost. But again, this is not hypomanic. I still sleep 8, 9 hours a night, but I have energy. I've noticed a lot of energy to work since February, March, and now into April. But it's not hypomanic. It's just this burst of the sun is coming. So I suspect there is some rhythm there. And like you were talking about, Dad, it's the winter is the time for hibernation, and it's cold outside, and especially for humans who evolved in cold climates in the north, in Canada or in the Arctic or wherever. Essentially, you weren't going to gather much food. You were going to prepare all your food, all your meat. You were going to freeze it, or you were going to ferment whatever you had, and then you were going to go and you're just going to hunker down. Um, and of course, you would still have to hunt, and you would still have to find food, and you would still have to hunt for game, but it's going to accelerate in the summertime. So I suspect there is a huge evolutionary biological adaptation there. But the modern permutation, which is bipolar disorder, is when that gene expression just runs amok. When it's, like you said, Ian, it's the glucose hypermetabolism in the brain, where the neurons and the dendrites are just firing overly quickly. And again, it's the energy imbalance thing. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's funny, I noticed, I've even started to pick this out a little bit because I go to large men's groups and mental health and talk to a lot of people. I think the general vibe, the general zeitgeist, and the milieu of just being with people in social situations, it gets a little extra juice around March, around April, and then it starts to fade a little bit. That's especially true up in Canada and up in Alaska, but even here in Texas or in other places where it's less, the daylight variation is less significant, people still get that jolt of energy.
If we could talk to black bears and we could talk to them in, maybe, I don't know, September, the days are getting shorter, they'd probably go, "Oh yeah, man, I'm eating so much. I just feel so depressed, man. I can't do anything except eat all day long. I just want to sleep and eat. I feel terrible." And then we talk to the black bears in November. I just think I'm going to go sleep. And then we talk to the black bear in March. "Oh my gosh, the snow's melting. I'm going to go freaking crazy."
That's
Like,
right.
I'm going like, they might actually share some of what bipolar people go through when they cycle from either depression to mania.
Oh man, they're gonna try and put black bears in SSRIs after this. It's like
No, I hope not.
it's like it's that's super interesting though, because like there's so many good analogies with what happens there. The bear is inducing insulin resistance intentionally to suppress its glucose metabolism to conserve energy for the winter. It's like trying to use less glucose through the winter, and that's a bit analogous to like having actual like broken insulin resistance, where you just have that broken all the time, and obviously ketosis is involved in those states. And there's a really interesting study in bipolar patients in the spring as well, where you do see these change in metabolites. It's just a kind of small study at the moment, but you see increasing glutamate, for example, this kind of high energy fuel source in the brain. And so I think there's definitely something there to what you're saying about the evolutionary piece.
So you're saying there's more glutamate, which is it's the excitatory neurotransmitter, right, Ian? There's more of that in the spring in bipolar cohorts compared to the general population.
Yeah, there's just one small study on it at the moment, but I think it's more interesting than people realize. I mean, because we always talk about serotonin, dopamine in mental health, but the brain is flooded with glutamate. If you were sort of filling up a bathtub with the relative proportions of the different neurotransmitters, you'd have a whole bathtub of glutamate filling the brain and a very tiny capful of serotonin and dopamine. That they actually exist in tiny concentrations compared to how much research focus they're given. And you see these really profound changes in glutamate over, for example, in the pilot study we did brain imaging, and that was the pilot study you supported. It was the first time we saw when you put a bipolar person in ketosis, it reduces their brain glutamate, and it was by a larger amount than we'd seen in like anti-seizure medications, which is the specific thing they're often trying to change with anti-seizure medications. So I think glutamate is playing quite a big role in this, and it's been kind of overlooked in favor of serotonin and dopamine. So I'm excited to research that, and we will look look at that in the RCT coming up next year with 206 patients with brain imaging.
It's not the ketone thing. People think the brain energy is the whole story. It's not, because the bioavailability of the proteins in plant and vegan diets don't and allow you to actually build the neurotransmitters to function to maintain this homeostasis in the brain. So you actually need the amino acids from eating meat to build the neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, etc., that can give you the proper functioning for your brain to perform well. That's why people who go on a vegan ketogenic diet, even if they're in ketosis, even if they're producing ketones, they can sometimes still be depressed, not have the recovery, because they literally don't have the nutrients. So the keto is a piece of it, but it's also the neuroinflammation. It's also the oxidative stress. It's also getting all the nutrients, which is why I personally recommend eat meat, bro, eat beef, eat steak, eat eggs, eat stuff like this primarily. And then you can mix in some plants as if you want, but vegan, for metabolic health, generally not my recommendation.
It's super fascinating how you've applied this systems thinking approach to this, like through a personal experience, trying so many different things, looking at all the outcomes. It's really exciting an approach to this. I think it's what we've been missing. I think it's been so focused on these small paradigms, these kind of like finite games of psychiatry, and we're now moving into a bigger space because of what you've done for the field. So I'm just super appreciative, and it's really exciting to hear from your story and how it's come out of that.
The stars in the show are Matt, because he's lived it. Then the stars of the show are Jan, my wife and Matt's mom, because she's the one who really swarmed on trying to find those solutions. And now, as they've become uncovered, in a way, this is what a wonderful opportunity for philanthropy, because the whole area of metabolic health, what you eat needs less FDA approval than a new drug or a new device. Most people and most doctors are comfortable adjusting protein, fat, carb ratios, especially with healthy foods. So, and as we know, there's just such an opportunity, just like in the 50s when the doctors would share what was the best cigarette, to inform the public of a new paradigm where this really could be part of the toolkit of any psychiatrist as they explore, mental health. So, um, I would say Matt and Jan are the stars of the show. There's just it's such an amazing field to work in, and it's like fortunate to work in a field with so much opportunity.
And also the
So
doctors, Ian, y'all, and everyone at Zoltan and everyone who's working on the studies who are putting these together. It's they're all such wonderful people. Not only the people in metabolic psychiatry, but the oncologists, the cardiologists, Dr. Scher, Dr. Brett Scher, just everyone involved in this whole metabolic movement. Dr. Ken Berry. They're the independent thinkers. They're the people who have questioned the existing paradigm of the food pyramid, of low-fat diets, of high carb, of statins, of LDL, basically all of this infrastructure, this built-in stuff we have in medicine. So going to these conferences, I mean, they're the future stars of the show for me. It's the people who are doing the research, and also all of the med students who are curious about this. And I talk to these kids in medical school who are so interested in this because they're not entrenched in decades of diagnose and prescribe. They want to find treatments that work. So I'm so excited just to see this. We're going to have a wave of kids coming out of medical school who are curious about metabolic psychiatrists and want to incorporate ketogenic metabolic therapies into their practice. And the world needs it. And I do think that's coming.
definitely. You can see it in the UK hugely. I mean, this went from being not even on the radar because of what you guys are doing to being like a major field of science. We have like a hub for metabolic psychiatry funded by the government. We have this huge RCT with 206 people happening this year, and it's thanks to you guys starting this field. And I think it's cool that it's come from your personal battle with this. It's like it makes it more meaningful to me as a patient and someone who's been through this with my own family that it came from that perspective. It didn't come from like all these lab experiments with mice and with targets. It came from real human beings going through struggles. So I appreciate you working through this, and it must have been incredibly hard to go through all those different treatments and still kind of hold out hope that you could fix this and find a solution. So I really appreciate your tenacity in working through that, because not many people could have done that. And I think it was that kind of determination that yourself, the way you worked through that with David and with Jan, and also kind of just sticking it out. Like, so many people give up. They try like 3 things. I've got many friends who've been through that, and then they just stop trying and they just stay on one thing, and it's a totally different life. So yeah, just really appreciate what you've done to make this happen, both as a patient and as a researcher. And I think it's just amazing that this came from like the care of a family, which is something that I've experienced from my father and my family as well. So I know how much that means when you live with a mental illness. So really appreciate everything you're doing, and thank you so much for making the time today to talk about it and share your story. Really excited to see the future of this field. It's growing every week at the moment. There's a new exciting, I get these kind of AI updates on metabolic psychiatry, and every week it's saying like acceleration growth, which is, quite cool to see in a field. It's not happened in psychiatry for a long time. So thank you so much. If you could share any advice, Matt, for someone that's kind of going through this and is, struggling with like having this frustration with not finding answers, and they're unwell and it's a scary experience, what would you say to someone who might be going through that at the moment?
Oh, well, if you haven't already, ketogenic diet, and you would preferably ease into it. If you have bipolar, ease into it over 10 or 12 weeks. There can be some hypomanic symptoms in the beginning. Yeah, try this, guys. Just try metabolic therapies and check out Metabolic Mind. Check out my own YouTube channel, all these resources. Find a dietitian or metabolic psychiatrist to help you if possible. If not, just go for it. I mean, people are suffering, and don't give up. And the last piece of advice would be, if you're going to do this, do it. Do not cheat. Dad, you told the story about Mexico, right? It's like a medication. Every day has to be in ketosis, at least for 9, 12, 18 months, and then you can reassess.
Thank you for that. And David, what would you say to like parents who are going through this and are having a kid who's going through their first symptoms, and it's a scary experience, and they're looking for answers in a system that doesn't always give you a kind of very clear answer? What advice would you give to someone, a parent who's going through this at the moment and looking for answers for their kid that's experiencing this?
I would say don't give up. Keep working on it. Keep trying things. Get multiple opinions. It's a lot of work to find one doctor. Finding several to get opinions or others to get insight is even more work. I would recommend exploring a wide range of things, including keto, under the care of a doctor, rather than, it is a bigger thing than getting your shirts dry cleaned and going in and picking any dry cleaner and it's going to be okay. There is going to be a lot of work to keep working to find the right treatment and the right doctor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much both for making time. It was great to speak with you.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank you
for
Ian.
coming
Thank
on.
you all. That was
Thanks.
awesome. I appreciate being on the show.
For more, please like and subscribe. Our channel is for informational purposes only. We are not providing individual or group medical or healthcare advice, nor establishing a provider-patient relationship. Many of the interventions we discuss can have dramatic or potentially dangerous effects if done without proper supervision. Consult your healthcare provider before changing your lifestyle or medications.